In this hopefully short video, I'm going to try and tell you everything you need to know about filmmaking, more or less. Let's start with the basics, so camera techniques. This is an extreme wide shot or establishing shot, and it's basically used at the start of a scene to map out the geometry so the audience understands where everything is. Fairly simple. This is a wide shot, and it's often used to give a nice wide view of everything that's going on. This is a mid shot, a little bit closer in, and it's from the waist to the head of the subject. This is a medium close-up, and at this point we're starting to make important decisions about where the audience's attention goes. This is a close-up, commonly used in someone's face or something else that's important. This is an extreme close-up, they're commonly just people's eyes so that you can convey their emotions. This is the first ever short film I made, and you'll very quickly notice that pretty much every shot is a wide shot. Do not do this. The whole point of cinematography is to craft what the audience is looking at, and if you do this, it leaves nothing to the imagination because they can see everything. This grid you're looking at is known as the rule of thirds. If there's a person in the frame, then their eyeline should generally be on the top third. They should also be looking into the other 2/3 of the screen. If there's space behind them like this, then you're doing it wrong because there's nothing for them to look into and it looks a bit strange. This is a high angle shot, and it's generally used to make the subject feel small, vulnerable and powerless. And this is a low angle shot, often known as the hero angle, and it's because it makes the subject feel very large and powerful. This is an over the shoulder shot. You'll commonly see this in interviews, but it's used whenever people are talking, so you see it in films as well. The idea with this is just that when you swap around to the other side, it's on the other person's shoulder, hence the name over the shoulder shot. If we rotate around to the other shoulder and look over the right hand shoulder of this person, it's actually wrong. We're breaking a rule called the 180-degree rule. The idea with this is just that if we're looking over the same shoulder of both characters, when the camera cuts, it's sometimes a little bit confusing for the audience where we're looking. Here, this is an example of what it should look like. So we're looking over the right hand shoulder of this character and the left hand shoulder of this character. What we're looking at here is known as lens compression, and this happens whenever you zoom in and out using any kind of lens on a camera. When you zoom very far out, the space between the characters seems a lot more exaggerated, whereas if you zoom all the way in, the space between them gets compressed, hence the name lens compression. Here's an example of zooming all the way in and all the way out next to each other. Notice the space between the characters. If someone was lost, you could zoom out really far and make it feel like their surroundings are really large, or if they're a bit claustrophobic or you want them to feel cramped, you can zoom in and compress the space. This is your standard pan shot. It's pretty much just used to reveal something that wasn't previously in the frame, like a location or a character. And this is a tilt shot, the same as the pan, but it's vertical movement. This is a crab shot, and it's when you move along next to a character as they're walking, so following them horizontally. And this is a tracking shot, moving backwards or forwards following an important subject. This is known as a focus pull, and it's when you manually change the focus on the lens so that you change the focal point of the image. A filmmaker can use this to decide what the audience looks at, so here the focus shifts from the pen to the car crash taking place behind it. That's pretty much everything for camera techniques. Now onto editing. Again, we'll start with the basics. For example, something like a jump cut.
It looked like this!
So yeah, jump cuts are pretty much used to get a cheap scare out of an audience. They're commonly seen in horror films like this, so we'll cut to something very quickly that's quite alarming. For example, a monster behind somebody. This editing technique is known as match on action. If you watch here, as the shots change, I'm actually doing the same thing in both frames. Watch how my arms are positioned here, and then when the shot changes, my arms are in the same position. This is an example of the first shot and the next shot next to each other. You might notice there's a few frames of overlap where my arms are in a different position, and that's purely because it takes the audience a few seconds to reanalyze what's happening in the frame. So this just helps to sell the action more. Let's talk about pacing when editing, because the pace of an edit is very, very important depending on what the mood of the edit is. This is the beginning of a Halloween horror film I made with my friends this year, and you'll notice that like most horror films, it starts off quite slow. There's not that many cuts between each other, so I think there's 5 or 6 in this over the course of a minute. And then once the main storyline kicks in, you can see that the cuts increase in frequency quite a lot, so there's one sort of every 3 or 4 seconds for quite a while. The frequent cutting keeps the audience on their toes a bit, because it allows them to look at the frame for less before it changes, and this creates a bit of a sense of mystery because they're not quite sure what's going on, and that's why it works well for intense scenes. Colour grading is another really important thing when you're editing, because it can really shape the feel of the piece. This is an example of a really classic Hollywood action film where you add some contrast, some vignetting, and desaturate it a bit to get that punchy feel. This is just a side-by-side comparison of before and after the colour grade. But you can do pretty much anything to create a specific mood, so you can add green or blue for sci-fi, red for horror, etc. Transitions are something that get overlooked a lot in editing, but they're really, really important. You can have a dissolve between 2 shots like this, or you can fade in or fade out like the end of this one. Just promise me whatever you do, you won't use the built-in ones in iMovie or Windows Movie Maker like these really, really cheesy ones. There was a guy called George Lucas who made a tiny film franchise known as Star Wars, and he was a massive fan of the wipe transition, as you can see. But as a general rule, it's better to stay away from the fancy animated transitions simply because they pull the audience out and make them remember that they're just watching a film. Okay, so next let's talk about sound. Sound is one of the most overlooked things in filmmaking because these days most phones can film at a decent quality, so the video isn't really that much of a struggle. But one thing that phones really don't do well, and also entry-level cameras, is audio. The microphones on cameras are omnidirectional, which means that they pick up sound from all around them, including aeroplane noises, car noises, people screaming in the background. They're pretty terrible. This is why for filmmaking we have 3 specific types of microphones that help to get a much better crafted sound. There's shotgun mics, condenser mics, and lavalier mics. I don't actually own a lavalier mic, so please accept this photo of one instead. The most common microphone you'll see in filmmaking is a shotgun mic. The reason shotgun mics are used so commonly is because they pick up sound from the front, not really from the sides or the back, which means that you don't get any unwanted sound leaking in. Most shotgun mics on professional film sets look like this. However, you can also get ones like this that go directly into the camera. They offer slightly lower quality, but are very popular amongst vloggers because they're very easy and quite light. However, if you want the higher sound quality, you're going to need an audio recorder like this and also an XLR cable to connect them up. Shotgun mics are commonly used on boom poles like this because it allows you to get above the subject and angle the microphone exactly where you want for the most controlled sound. Condenser mics are used more commonly for voiceovers and audio recording for music because of the higher sound quality that they offer. The reason they're not very practical for filming on set is because you have to be very, very close, literally about 4 inches away for the best sound quality. These types of microphones have a very rich, bassy sound to them, which is why they're very popular for voiceovers and music recording. And seeing as I don't have a lav mic, I've just pinched this footage off the BBC. I really hope they don't mind. This thing attached to this girl's collar is a lav mic, and as you can see, they're really discreet and they're really small, which is great for interviews because obviously you don't want to be holding a massive mic in front of someone's face. But they're not very good for sound quality, but as I said, they're quite discreet, so they do have their uses. Okay, that's sound done. Now let's discuss lighting. Lighting's another one of those things that's enormously overlooked, especially by amateurs. You can have nice sound, a nice camera, nice everything, but to be honest, lighting is one of the things that shapes the way your image looks most of all. So, this is an example of high key lighting, which means that there are lots of lights hitting the subject. This is also an example of 3-point lighting because there are 3 lights in the scene. We have our key light, which is the brightest of the 3 lights and lights up the majority of the face. Then there's the fill light, which fills in the other side of the face opposite to the key light. This is less intense. And then we have our edge light or rim light, which adds this sort of halo effect that you can see to the outside of my body. When all 3 of these are combined together, it creates a very evenly lit image and is one of the most common lighting setups in filmmaking. Each of these on their own is an example of low key lighting, which means that there's a lot of contrast in the scene. Something else you can use instead of a light is a reflector, which is a white or shiny surface. A reflector bounces the light from a light source back onto the subject from a different angle like this. For this shot I just used the key light and a backlight, but watch what happens when I introduce the reflector. Ta-da! I hope you think that looks a lot better. The lights bounce back onto the other side of my face, which creates less contrast and less shadow, so my facial features are more visible. Here's the before and after shot when using a reflector. As you can see, the shadows from the right hand side of my face are reduced a lot by the light bouncing back. We're nearly done, but there's one more important thing you need to know about lighting, and that's how to use gels. Gels are these pieces of materials that you can put over lights to change the colour and the softness. This is a piece of diffusion, and when it's applied to the light, it makes the light a lot softer. This is with the diffusion on, and if I take it off, you can see that the light becomes a bit harsher and more intense. One of the main effects of this is that it creates sharper shadows. And then you can get gels of all different colours, such as red, green, blue, yellow, pink, orange. And these work in a similar way to the colour grading in the sense that you can apply different colours to create different tones. For example, blue and green would be used for sci-fi and red for horror. Well guys, I think that's everything you need to know about filmmaking to get started. This is obviously just scratching the surface of the industry, but you can't really go wrong by starting with this information. I'm planning on going into some more detail on some of these, so if you'd like to see a specific topic, leave it in the comments and I'll probably get around to it at some point. Thank you very much for watching and I hope this was helpful.